Today on Die Trying, I let Mother Nature do all the work while I sit back and reap all the benefits. Kinda.
Die Trying.
A few years back, a giant limb fell out of my willow tree in the backyard. My first thought was, how can I use this for some of my projects? And if you watch my projects, you've seen me use some of these materials in the past to make a log bench for my fireplace. I figured I could use what fell out of this tree, but I didn't want to just go the generic route and cut it up into usable lumber. I wanted to try to find what was unique about this and use it while it still maintained its willow tree look, if that makes sense. So I'm going to show you how I was able to take this and turn it into one of my favorite projects I've ever done. And hopefully you'll be able to learn some stuff along the way to save you some time when you're doing this, because this was time consuming and a huge pain in the ass. So about 3 months ago, I dragged this big, huge hunk of rotten wood into my workshop and thought I was going to cut it all up and make bowls out of it. But once I got it in here, I decided to try flattening out the top and see if I could get it kind of close to flat. To do this, I just made this little table thing, as you can see right there. Then I could rest my Japanese pull saw right on top of that little table and start making my cuts. This just helps me keep a level cut all the way around. I knew this wasn't going to be perfect, but I wanted to test out and see if I could even get close to a level cut, and also, if I could, it'd be a good place to start. The Japanese pull saw was working, but I wanted to see if I could get it done a little bit quicker, so I grabbed my reciprocating saw, and that worked great. Once I had that entire top cut to as level as I could using that little setup, I cut off some of the rot on the sides, and now it was time to try to start removing all of the rot from the inside of this piece of wood. I started by using my angle grinder with a carving disc like this on it. Just got these little teeth on it. King Arthur, I think, makes it. Or maybe they make gluten-free flour. I can't remember. So I started by using that to just start removing as much of the rot on the inside as I could, and it was coming out so fast I thought I was just going to breeze through this project. But unfortunately, I quickly learned that removing all this rot with just this carving disc was not going to be easy, and this project was going to take way longer than I thought. It was extremely time consuming and really difficult to get into those tight spots. But at the time, that was the only idea I had on how to move forward with this project. You'll see coming up in a few, I kind of figure out some other ways to do it. I'm still not positive that they were the best ways to do it, and I would love your input if this is the type of project that you've done. So throw your comment down below if you have any sort of input on how to get into those deep spots. Once I finished up with that carving wheel on that night, I decided to move on to using one of these sanding discs. It was a 60 grit flat disc. This still removes a ton of material, so you got to be careful you don't gouge or dig into your project. With a project like this though, there's so many gouges and indents, and just it's so natural looking that when you do take a chunk out or something like that, it's very hard to even notice once you seal it and it's all finished at the end. So the next morning I came out and brought it out thinking I had done a lot more to it than I had. I got it out into the driveway and you could really see that there was a ton of rot left on it, and I still had a lot of work to do. So I put that carving disc back on and got back to work carving out all the rot I could find. I switched between using the carving disc, the 60 grit flap disc, and one of these that screws right onto your angle grinder, and you can just put one of your orbital Velcro papers right onto that and sand with that. I actually used a knife to dig out some of the really deep spots where any more rot was. Whoa, look at that. Huge piece. All this rot out of here. There we go. Fantastic. But I also went online and ordered myself a cheap die grinder and a bunch of these bits. Can you see that here? And this helped me get into some of those deep crevices. I will say, maybe I don't understand a die grinder, but it seemed like this thing did not have much power. Every time I'd go deep into the wood, it would just cut out. Maybe my air compressor isn't strong enough. I don't know. Once again, leave a comment. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. After I got a lot of those deep crevices of rot out, I moved on to making this thing stable. The first thing I was going to have to do was add something to the front of this because it would rock forward if you put too much weight on the front of it. So I ended up taking a piece that I'd cut off of this log, brought it into the workshop and cut it the size of my miter saw. When I brought it back out and I could pre-drill some holes, screw this right to the bottom of it, and then fill in all those holes with some glue and dowels. With that being done, this will not rock forward. I was gonna have to figure out how to keep the rest of it stable later because at this point I was putting this away for a couple months while I took care of some other projects. Alright, a few months later and we are back out in the workshop with this. I had reached a point with this project where it was time to start hand sanding, which is not something I like to do. But I put on the 1987 classic Predator and just got to work. Okay, so here's one of the things that really helped me move this project along. I bought these little mini sanding pads that go on your angle grinder with these extension rods, sticks, whatever, I don't know. And these would have been really great, but the Velcro on these were absolute trash. I would not recommend buying this brand. I'm sure there's better brands out there. I bought the cheapos because I wasn't sure if it was even going to be any good. Turns out it wasn't, but I did not want to waste these because I figured they're kind of useless at this point, so in order to make them work for me, I just hot glued the sandpaper right onto them. I know that's kind of stupid, but it worked, and at this point I was going to throw these out because it just, every time I turn on the angle grinder, the sandpaper would just fly off of it, and it was like, well, these are useless. But once I decided to hot glue those on, I was able to get into all those deep spots with those little tiny sanding pads, and that worked so well. I also had this tool right here, I don't know, a ball gouge I think it's called, and I used this on my angle grinder to also get into those deep spots, which really helped too. I recommend having one of these ball gouges and those little sanding pads if you're gonna do a project like this. So now we reached the part where I had no clue how I was gonna take care of this issue. If I leaned on the back of this, it tipped right over. So I needed to stabilize this, and I was trying to figure out what to do. I actually tried a couple different things where I attached some wood to the back. I really hated it. I'm not gonna put you through watching all of that because it didn't work. I had a bunch of old random hairpin legs from old projects laying around. So I decided I would put this into my clamp and just cut them off right at the top so that this plate was gone. Now that I had some hairpin legs without a plate on the top, I could flip this over and drill some holes into the bottom and then just hammer this in. This stressed me out so much because it had the potential to split this entire log, or I could end up hammering it in too far and not be able to pull it back out. There was a lot at risk for something I'd been working on for so long, but in the end, it worked perfect. I hammered it in a little at a time, then would flip it over, flip it back over, hammer it a little more until I got the perfect spot. And once the first one was done, I knew I could do a second one, so I did another one on the other side of this, so now this thing sits perfectly flat and won't rock in any direction. And speaking of perfectly flat, it was time to get that top perfectly level. To do that, I took out this piece of MDF that I knew was flat and I laid it on top of this. So I put 60 grit sandpaper onto my angle grinder, put the MDF down, found all the low spots and all the high spots, and then removed the MDF and started sanding away all of the high spots until it sat flat. Now that this was sitting flat and it had a flat top, it was time to figure out one of the hardest parts, attaching the glass to the top for this coffee table. My original plan was to just glue the glass right to the wood, but the more I thought about that, the more I thought that was a terrible idea, because when you have to move this at some point, there's a big potential for the glass to break. And also, wood contracts and expands with the weather, so there was a really good chance that this glass was going to crack if I permanently glued it onto the top. The next idea I had was to just place the glass right on the top. And when I finished this project, I realized I probably could have done that in the first place, but what I ended up doing was buying some 3/4 inch rare earth magnets. And I used a Forstner bit to drill out the holes where these were going to sit. I then took these rare earth magnets and glued them into these holes. Once they were glued in, I brought this onto my porch and I could take these silver rare earth magnets, place them down on top of the magnets that were glued into the wood. I applied some glue to the top of each one of these magnets and then laid my glass on top of that and let it sit. And then after that, all that was left to do was seal this. This took me an entire can of varathane oil-based polyurethane. Typically I don't use a polyurethane like this, but I thought it would really help pull everything nice and tight together. And any sort of softer spots that I may have had and missed, I think it would help harden them up. They actually make a wood hardener for rotten wood. I have never used it before, but my dad has, and he said it works great. Now let's post this online for a week at $800 and see if we can sell it. I'll be back in 1 week for me, a second for you to let you know whether or not it's sold. Alright, it's been a week and I did not get the sale. Somebody offered me $500. I had originally posted it for $900 and just decided that I'd rather keep it than sell it for $500. I actually think it'll be the perfect table for our barn when we finally get to convert that into a full living space. And speaking of, if you want to see me convert this barn into a full living space, subscribe, share this video, go watch my other videos. The more views I get on this channel, the more money I raise, and the closer I get to doing bigger projects like that.
Bye. See you again. And have a good dream.